Hi, everyone. This is Miranda with the Valuable Voices podcast. I have Sonya MacCrimmon today from Toronto. I'm super excited for you guys to meet her. She's an entrepreneur, a life coach, and just has an inspiring story. I know many of you will relate. I know I did. So, Sonya, thank you for being on today. Super grateful you're here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Well, let's just dive right in. Again, I was checking out your website. I love it. It's beautiful. We'll tell people where to go and we'll put that in the notes. But kind of share your background. I know you talked about your master's that you got and some experiences that you had on your website, but just kind of share where you are now to where you got to today, being an entrepreneur and a life coach. I love what I've heard about you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It has been, quite a journey. And I would say I feel like I have quite a unique background or a unique way I got into it. But ultimately, I did my undergrad in psychology. And in one of my last years, it was one of those things where when you have a psychology degree, you don't really know like what's going to come of it.
Right.
But luckily for me, in my last year, I ended up taking a learning disabilities course, and I was really fascinated with that. And I ended up doing a placement in a school and just really fell in love with really connecting to like special needs with children and things like that. And so I ended up taking like a post-grad program and then ultimately my master's in behavior analysis. And on that journey, I ended up working at a few different places, and I ultimately had worked at an agency doing behavior therapy for kids with autism. And I worked my way up in that agency. And one of the biggest things that made me realize was that, apologies if you hear a dog in the background. So with that said, I had this experience at the agency where I worked my way up and I became a supervisor. And in that role, that was really where I'm an open book. I'm all about open communication. And that's really what my supervisory style was with all these different staff that I had and also with parents. And so I really leaned into that, and then I ended up getting my own life coach last year. And so that was really the eye-opening moment for me of like, wow, I feel really empowered, and just I fell in love with connecting with others. And that's the thing, working in behavior therapy with kids with autism, you have to work through a lot of challenging behaviors. There's a lot of difficult days. And so really just that support and community in that kind of aspect, I just really fell in love with that. And so that was a huge component of it. And so I realized, as a supervisor, I was like always there for my staff. I was like super supportive. I was allowing them to also like spread their wings and be very open to their ideas and letting them grow. And I always got such positive feedback from my staff. And so it was just really cool to walk into that. And so the fact that I got my own life coach, I was like, oh, this is a cool field. And so then I ended up starting my company last summer, and I fell in love with it. And I love having that impact and being able to support others on their own journey. And so it's kind of like my background is quite unique because I use a scientific framework based in behavior analysis in my coaching. And it's interesting because that actually made me feel like an imposter a bit in the coaching world because it was very different. So that was kind of a whole experience I had to go through on the entrepreneurial journey. But it was all so great and amazing. And that's
really
me.
awesome. How come you wanted a life coach? I know many people reach out for different reasons, but why did you want a life coach?
Ooh, that's a great question. I feel like at the time like 2-3 years ago, I feel like I started my healing journey and like really looking into reading books or taking courses about personal development. But it was one of those things where even though I did that, I still felt stuck.
Yeah.
And I just felt like I couldn't cross that barrier. Like I just was like, I felt like I was doing all the things on my own and still getting the same result of just like still feeling stuck, still being unsure of like where to go or how I can move forward. And then I started to follow a couple of coaches on Instagram. And when you do that, they share so many like valuable and supportive and great things. And then I really fell in love with the vibe of this one coach, and she had an 8-week group coaching program. And that just like, it was interesting because originally when I connected with her, I heard the price and I was like, nope. But then I let myself really, like, I think it was maybe 4 or 5 months later, she was doing like the next round of that program. And I was just like, I'm still stuck. I still feel this, like, and I was like, okay, like I'm ready now. And that was a huge moment. And honestly, since then, that was a huge moment for me. And I feel like I now have the tools to really work through it. And then obviously me becoming a coach and going and doing my own thing really just expanded that. But yeah.
That's awesome. Well, you talk about the 3 Ps. Do you want to mention that?
Yes, these are the biggest ones to always break down, but perfectionism, people pleasing, and procrastination. Those were like, the 3 that got me good for so long, and they still come up from time to time. But yeah, I've definitely got those tools in place now to really work through those.
And I think so many people can relate to that. I know I can. I think based on our circumstances, how we were brought up, we think we need to be perfect. We can't make mistakes, right? And then even people pleasing. I know that I have definitely walked through that, and it just doesn't get you to where you need to be. You're so busy trying to please somebody else, and you're not really, working on yourself or doing what's right for you or setting the right boundaries and things like that. So I love that. And even procrastination, I think everybody can identify with that as well.
Yeah. And that's the thing. They all intertwine to some degree. And, sometimes with perfectionism, we want it to be so perfect that we procrastinate.
Yeah.
But then we're trying so hard to make it look perfect for someone else that, that could be the people pleasing in us as well. So all these things really do tie together in different ways. And that's the thing, acknowledging that, and I think one of the biggest things is what we place on our identity.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of people will say proudly, I'm a perfectionist.
Right.
And not to say it's good or bad, but some people really place, and perfectionism is very much placing our worth in our performance rather than us as who we are as a person, our identity. And so with that perfectionism, or even any of these P's, it served a purpose for us at some point in life. Like perfectionism, like allowed me to work my way up a corporate ladder and really, hone in on my business and go and all these things. And so it does serve its purpose. They all do in their own way. It's just when it gets to a point of like exhaustion, burnout, constantly feeling stressed, it's all of those emotional feelings that you have attached to it, that if that just constantly gets so much for you, and that's, you're almost always living in that autopilot or survival, it gets exhausting. Absolutely. And so it works in certain ways. So I always say it's not good or bad, and it serves its purpose, but it's always allowing yourself to like work through it and understand like why it's coming up and how it's going to serve you in that moment. And if it doesn't feel aligned, then shifting out of it.
Right. And I think it's the awareness. I don't think sometimes we realize what we're doing until somebody else, like the coach, points it out to us and we're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. And it's funny too, like even with my husband, like sometimes he'll say or do things and I'll like catch it. And that's the thing, like, as you said, awareness, like it's kind of that glass shattering moment when it's like, when someone asks you like, oh, that person eats so loud. And it's like, you never realized it before. And then you eat with that person and it's like, you can never go back from that moment.
You can't focus on anything else.
Yeah. And it's the same with awareness. Like as soon as you catch yourself in a moment of like one key thing with people pleasing is over explaining. You feel this need to always like overemphasize or over exaggerate like certain explanations so that you can get that other person to understand where you're coming from. And you can't control like how they're going to respond. So if they kind of like dismiss you or don't really say much to it or don't validate you, you might take that extra step to continue to explain. And a lot of time, like we're not really aware of that, or we don't realize that that's a way to really try to, be seen or heard. And if we're not getting that from that person, we might like overextend ourselves to try even harder. And that was something that I definitely did a lot in the past. And now I'm like, oh, I don't need to justify myself, and I can't control how this person will respond to me. I can't make them see me or hear me or validate me.
Right.
And so having those kind of moments where you're like, oh, I see that now.
Right.
But then being able to kind of reel that back in and allow yourself to kind of process that. But yeah.
That's so good. I know you're really open about, being in an emotionally abusive relationship, and I'm sure all of us can, relate to that in some way, what do you want to share about that? And again, I'm sure there's many people out there, so you don't have to go into too many details, but how do you know? What does that look like? How did you realize that? Did somebody from the outside come in, or are you like, I'm not, sometimes it's hard to know we're in that situation until somebody else points it out to us. What was that like for you?
I mean, in all honesty, nobody knew. And I think that was the harder part, was I was taking it on and not understanding that I was.
Right.
And not to say I was delusional, but I felt like I was at like a crazy point for me of like, I would make excuses for him. I would, like cover things up or like make it seem like everything is fine. So it was always like on the surface, everything looked fine, but like behind closed doors was not so much. So it was like one of those things where I felt like I thought that was normal. And that's, 100% like the hardest part to process. And so like I saw red flags 6 months in, but I stayed for 4 years. So it's like in the beginning, I was very much like, oh, it's fine. Oh, that's okay. And then it's just like over time, it just built up more and more. And then it made me question myself, question the relationship. And it was very much like all extremes, like very terrible to like, okay, next within 24 hours, we're going to be fantastic. And that fluctuation of extremes just really pulls at you emotionally, because you're just like, I don't know left to right, and so it just, the emotional exhaustion in that kind of process, it pulls on you. But I think the biggest thing that I realized in that whole process was I did not trust myself at all. And so I feel like that was honestly the main reason why I stayed in it for as long as I did, because I didn't know any better per se. Like I didn't trust myself. So I believed the things he would say, even though he'd twist my words and make it seem like it was all my fault and get mad at me. But it was like, I had this belief because of what he told me. So I believed it. And I didn't trust myself to know any better at the time. And so it was one of those things where like I bought a book that was called like Too Good to Leave, Too Bad to Stay. Like I literally kept I would talk to my girlfriends about it, but it was still like a very like eggshells kind of situation where it's like they can't really tell me, or even if they did, it also made me feel that much more scared to make the decision. Like I was so fearful of the aftermath that it was just easier to stay, even though that wasn't best for me, but everyone else was happy. So that was, at that time, that was like my safety. But, for me personally, it just like, it got to a breaking point. And I feel like the unfortunate part about these kind of situations is that that's almost what you need to really make that final decision. And it was a breaking point, and I was ready to, and that's the thing. I don't think if I did it earlier, or I think personally and mentally, I was ready to make the decision and stick with it. And I finally like trusted my gut and was like, this feeling is not going away. Like this gut feeling of like, it doesn't feel right. And I officially just kind of did that. And yes, the aftermath was rough, but honestly, I will say like after I did it, like the biggest weight off my shoulders, like just emotionally and mentally, was huge. And yes, the aftermath was not pretty, but like I felt free. Like I felt like I could actually just do what I want, be who I want. And that was just kind of the starting point of figuring out myself and like what I wanted. And that was a whole process in itself too. But Yeah.
Yeah. And again, you're not alone in that. I know so many people have been there, myself included, and it's almost like you have to be removed from it in order to look back and see exactly what you'd gone through. And right or wrong, doing things differently, who knows? Doesn't matter, right? But it's just the growth and the awareness and the realization that you deserve better. And it's usually your identity, it's believing the lies that somebody's saying who you're not, or yeah, it's just trusting your gut too. I could totally relate to that. So thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
So tell us where we can find you on your website. And I know you have some offers on there and some different coaching and group sessions. So tell us what you have on your website and where to find you.
Yeah, so my website is sonyamaccrimmon.com. You can find all the info there. I can also share a freebie with your audience. It is 5 steps to lasting change. It's really great, kind of breaks down the very basic first steps of understanding where you want to start on your healing journey. And you can find me on Instagram. That's my main hub. So it's sonyajmac.coaching. I have one-on-one spots available. So that's definitely a section you can check out at my website. And I've got a habit booster session and a breakthrough session. So those are 2 kind of one-time service sessions
Okay.
to really work on. And yeah, I have a group program that is all about the 3 Ps that is coming up later in October. So that will be on my website for them to check out as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you being on again. I love your story. I love what you're doing. It's super inspiring. So keep doing what you're doing, and you guys check her out. I know I definitely want to. I love the habits. That's something I'm always working on, different habits. So I'd love to pick your brain on that another time. But thank you so much for being on, and God bless you all. Thanks for listening. Take care.
Awesome.